to Our Last Meal, the podcast on grief, loss, and food. I'm your host, Andrew, and every episode I talk with a guest about someone important in their life, someone that they've lost, and what role food played in their relationship. I was honored this week to be joined by Drew Garcia, and we'll jump to that conversation here in just a few moments. I really enjoyed it. I think you will too. I just want to cover a couple of things up top before we jump into that. One of them, and this is kind of serendipitous, I think, or maybe it's purely a coincidence, but I just got an alert on my phone from Reddit thanking me for 1 year of being a user with the Our Last Meal pod handle. And I bring that up just to say that, this show is coming up on a year of actually putting out episodes, but it started before that in January of last year. And it's just really cool for me to see that, there's been some growth in a year. I've talked to some amazing people. I've learned a lot. I'm hoping that people that have joined me along the way have learned something as well. If nothing else, I hope it's given you a chance to, get in touch with your own feelings and think about them more, talk about them, hopefully. I just wanted to throw that out there. I think that's really cool. And I'm actively thinking of things to do to celebrate 1 year whenever I hit that milestone in May. So more to come on that. I'll say up top, as I always do before the show starts, if you like this, please consider sharing it with a friend or family member or anonymously online. I think anything is good. I don't do this for money. This is a passion project, but I want to get it out there. I want people to hear it, to help people. It's what I'm hoping that this does. So if you can share it, I would appreciate it. If you don't feel comfortable sharing it, if you would feel comfortable rating, reviewing wherever you listen to podcasts, that's great too. I always hear podcasts say that the ratings and the reviews, they help, something to do with an algorithm. I'm not going to pretend to know how much it helps or how much it can impact, but I don't think it can hurt. So if you enjoy this, if you have enjoyed this, I would really appreciate that. With all that said, I'll jump into the episode. I think you're going to enjoy this one. I know that I certainly did. Content warning up top, though, as always. The show does talk about death, so please just be mindful as you listen. Hello and welcome to Our Last Meal. I'm your host, Andrew, and my guest this week is Drew Garcia, immigration advocate and former co-host of the Today Well Lived podcast. Drew, thank you for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm happy to have you on. We were talking before we started recording, and I just want to say it's always fun to get a guest on to just come and talk with me. But I feel like you and I just immediately clicked, and so I just appreciate you coming on open mind, open heart, and willing to talk.
Hey, Andrew, I'm sorry. I think we've started to buffer with each other.
Oh,
I didn't get any of that.
Oh crap!
Do you want to start over?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Okay.
I can. Let me do a speed check. Let me make sure it's not me.
Sure. I'll do the same thing.
Okay, I think it's me. My upload's a little bad. I'm gonna reset my router. If you can wait.
Yeah, of course.
Give me a second.
Sure.
You're gonna lose me, but give me a second.
Hey, no worries. I'll be here.
Testing 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2. Hey.
Hey.
Hey, there you are. I didn't have to do anything.
Oh,
It just came back.
yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah. That was so weird. As soon as we hit record, it it started to die on me. Uh,
Yeah.
so weird.
Okay.
All right, let me
No
just
worries.
real quick here.
I appreciate you catching that though.
Yeah. I um I switched over to one of those mobile hotspot deals that
Okay.
T-Mobile sells, and it works pretty good most of the time. But
Now, I wonder too. Do we need to? Maybe I don't know if it would help if we cut off the video. Maybe that's too
oh,
much.
maybe. Let's see.
We can try that.
See what kind of bandwidth I got now. Okay, so that's good. Yeah, maybe we should kill the video. That might help.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Cut mine off. See if that
All right.
helps at all.
Okay. All right. I'm ready when you are.
All right, cool. So I'll redo the introduction and then we'll
Mhm.
jump in.
Sounds good.
All right. So I'll do another countdown and just imagine me doing pointing at you for the silent one.
Okay.
All right. So we'll start up again in 3, 2. Hello and welcome to our last meal. I'm your host Andrew, and my guest this week is Drew Garcia, immigration advocate and former co-host of the Today Well Lived podcast. Drew, thank you for joining me today.
Andrew, thanks for having me.
I'm happy. I'm glad to have you on. We were chatting a bit before we got started. I always love having people on who I haven't had a chance to really talk to yet, other than just their email. And I find that 9 times out of 10, whoever I'm talking with, we hit it off pretty quickly, and that was definitely the case today. So I'm glad to have you here.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. I love doing this kind of thing. I've been listening to your show in preparation for my appearance here, and I like I told you before, it feels like I know you already a little bit.
Yeah, that's when you told me that, I'd never thought about that before. So you're I think you're about a 20th on the list of folks that I've talked to, and I've yet to come to terms with the fact that some people may listen to this and come on and they've already heard a little bit about me. Um, it's kind of weird in a way, but it's also kind of cool. So um, you're the first person to make me think about that. So thank you.
No problem. It's actually when we were doing our content podcast a few years back, we wondered if we were just screaming into the night because we never got any feedback from any of. Well, that's not true. We had one listener who ended up becoming a guest, but after that, we were like, we could see the if you've never done a podcast, most of the applications that host it, they'll show you kind of where people are in the world, and there were times where we were like, "Come on, man, just send us a tweet or something," and never got any feedback. And like these people they like us enough to listen, but not enough to say hello. So
Yeah, that yeah, and I'll say that, and that's something I don't think I've really ever addressed on this show is that it does kind of sometimes feel like it is that screaming into the void thing and hoping that somebody hears you. It is cool to see those numbers climb up and to see that, like, okay, people are listening to it, so that's cool. But anytime you can hear from somebody who actually has listened to it, it means a lot. Um, One of my best friends, he sent me an email or a text message a few weeks ago, and I won't call him out by name, but if he hears this, he'll feel free to shoot me a text message and just tell me you heard it. But he sent me a message that he'd heard a new episode with Pamela, who read some poetry, and
mhm.
incredible poet, and it gave him chills listening to her read. And it's stuff like that that's cool to me, that just content I get to put out that people I know in real life get to enjoy, and hopefully it introduces them to a new musician, a poet, artist, or just a new podcast.
Yeah, it makes me think about how many thousands of people are out there um, producing content just like this, and all the amazing audio that must be out there, but you just don't know about it, right? Because it hasn't shown up on your feed or social media, or your friend hasn't told you about it. And I used to say this on our show. I go, if you're enjoying this, then you're kind of a jerk for not letting your all your friends know about it, right?
Yeah, share it, share the good stuff. Don't bogart it. Let people know about it.
Exactly.
Um, yeah, and it's I don't get me wrong. I'm a big podcast listener. I'm subscribed to a lot. I love a lot of the big podcast companies and shows. A lot of the Wondery stuff. Reply All Before They Ended was one of my favorite. This American Life is still probably my all time favorite podcast, and it's
Hmm.
got a lot of weight behind it. But just like with restaurants, with stores, I would encourage people seek out, those small shops or the small, indie types that are doing something and trying to put something out there. There's a lot of good stuff out there that just doesn't have the same power behind it, but doesn't mean it doesn't have the same quality.
Yeah, it's interesting. I picked up on podcasting. I was listening to podcasts. I was trying to think about how far back it had been. It might have been right around 2009, 2010, and I remember having a Samsung, like the Samsung knockoff of the Motorola Blade. Remember that phone that would
Yeah,
flip open that was real popular?
yeah,
I didn't have that phone. I had the knockoff from Sprint. And it had a little app that would I think it was either Stitcher or something like that, that could play podcasts, right? And there was almost no content. And the first thing I heard was Joey Diaz on the Joe Rogan Experience before it became what it is today,
yeah.
and I was hooked. Right, here are these guys just having like these 3 hour conversations, and they were hilarious, and they would talk about things that are just not appropriate. But I used to be on the road a lot, and I would listen to 3 4 hours of content every day in the car, and it came at the perfect time because I used to listen to like talk radio out here in California. The station that used to host like the talk radio show, like on the FM,
Yeah.
they changed formats to like another, like, top 40, which is fine. I like top 40 music, but I didn't need another station, right? And so it filled the void right at the perfect time, and then I picked up onto um it's This American Life, right? It's been a while since
Yeah.
I've yeah.
I love that one.
Yeah. So it's been and eventually, if you listen to enough podcasts, you're going to end up with a podcast, right? It's just the rule.
It does feel that way. This American Life. So that is one of my all-time favorites. Podcast radio shows. The first podcast I ever remember, subscribing to and listening to was Stuff You Missed in History Class, and it's I think it was the Stuff You Should Know website network group. Um, I haven't listened to it in a long time, just because over the years your tastes change a bit. But I remember the two women who hosted that. Whenever I started listening, were great, and I love the show. And I was like, oh, this is really cool, and it kind of opened me up to more of the talk radio as well. And whenever I was let me see, about 10 years ago, I would have been working second shift. or getting off work around 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night. And I remember coming home, instead of putting on music after work, for some reason I just got in the habit of talk radio. And
Hmm.
Saturdays when I would work was when NPR would have their their public radios remix stuff.
Frickin'
So
frack.
that's what.
Frickin' frack. Or
Yeah, I mean,
the
that's the thing. There's so much stuff that I got hooked in there, and
yeah.
it was that's what opened me up to This American Life and Roman
Hmm.
Mars. I'm Roman Mars, 99% Invisible. Everything he does is just great, and I've gotten into so many good podcasts just from listening to him as well. So um, it's like you said, but though it's I remember reading one time that the modern version of we should start a band is we should start a podcast.
Or
But you're
yeah,
you're right though. It's you listen to enough of them, you're like, well, I could do that, and
sure it could. Yeah.
Amazon
I mean,
microphone later. Here we are.
yeah, yeah. When we first started our show, we started off with the SM7, like the standard mic that you see everywhere,
Yeah,
like on it, like at at open mics. A lot of musicians use it, but it was a
yeah,
bad microphone. Because if you're not recording in a studio, those mics are really hot, right? So we ended up getting a different, I forget what this microphone is called, but it vastly improved the recording because it would condense out all the background noise, or the most of it. And yeah, you end up going deep. At least we did.
yeah. I
So yeah.
It's easy to snowball,
Hmm. Yeah.
especially you know the coolest thing for me, and I like I said, I don't talk about this often, but maybe I should say this more. But the coolest thing for me is just the idea of creating something, and something you believe into, because this show is really something that it is a passion project. I make no money off of this. This is solely because I enjoy talking with people, and I enjoy giving people an opportunity to openly grieve and talk about grief, and honor loved ones. That's whenever I reach out to people to be on the show, that's one of the things that I always make sure to point out, is that this is not a this is not supposed to be a sad podcast. This is to be a place to honor somebody you care about, and getting
Yeah.
to have those conversations and put that out there it's an important thing to me.
Yeah. I think it's yeah, I've heard a few of your guests say, it's a topic that people tend to try to avoid.
Yeah,
And I think that's the it's the product of the westernized version, or westernized outlook on death. And I think, having had some experience with grief, that the better thing to do is to put it all out there, right?
yeah,
If you're in pain, it's better to just express it, because bottling it up, suppressing it, makes it worse, in my opinion. And I I personally feel that, what I've heard in my experience of your show so far, keep calling it a show, of your podcast, is that this is a celebration of these people. It really
exactly.
is the way I see it.
Well, and I'm glad you see that, because that is the hope, is that this is y- the guest I spoke to a different guest last night. It's odd. As you and I are talking, that episode hasn't released. That'll come out in a couple of days, and then this episode will come out a few weeks later than that. That's it's the weird podcast time travel.
Hmm.
Um, but she and I were talking after we got done recording our episode, and you know she had the take that it feels like a joyous celebration of life and loved ones, as opposed to just a conversation about death and loss. And I really think that's such an eloquent way to put what I'm trying to do and what I'm encouraging others to do. Because you're right, we don't have conversations about death, and not just death. Relationships ending. Grief can be for a person, a place, a thing, a time. We spoke about Jake, who was on my show several months ago, and whenever I spoke to Jake, he talked about grief, not just from losing a person, but from losing, a place and time, and that
Hmm.
idea of nostalgia.
Yeah, he
But
spoke about his grandmother's house, right, and how it was being torn
yeah,
apart or remodeled, or forget the actual.
yeah. Well, and it if I remember correctly, it was they were she was moving out, and it's a place that he spent a lot of time at as a kid, And so we don't talk about these things. I think there's a lot of stiff upper lip, and
Hmm.
this thing sucks, but I'm just gonna bottle that up and keep it to myself, and not really go into detail on it. So, my hope is that by doing this in some small way, I'm encouraging others to talk about it more, and
Yeah.
and not feel like you have to bottle that up and keep it to yourself.
Yeah, it's I would encourage people to take a different take on, not that I wish anything to happen to anybody or their loved ones, but the next time you face grief is to allow yourself to, don't, I'm saying this wrong. Um is to let the feeling that are bubbling up, just let them roam free, right? If that's crying, if that's breaking down. When I lost my nephew in 2012, um, one of the hardest things was, my sister-in-law, one of the strongest persons I've ever met, by the way. She wanted us to give eulogies, right?
Mm,
To speak about the memories of him. In my family, in particular, we're just an emotional bunch, right? And none of us could stand there and
yeah,
speak because I can't speak for the rest of my siblings or the rest of my family, but I knew personally that I was not going to be able to get through, like, even break a word, right? Because the moment that I would have opened my mouth, I would have just immediately been in tears. And thinking back, I
yeah,
kind of regret it because at the very least, I could have been up there and be like, it's okay to cry. And even now, as I'm saying that, like, I can feel the emotions coming to the surface. But I wish I could go back and say, hey, this is a terrible thing that happened to our family, and it's okay to cry, right? It's okay to scream and to yell, and I encourage it, right? Because let it out. What why what how does it help anybody not to, especially yourself, in my
yeah.
opinion.
I think that's perfectly said, and I'll say too. I'm so sorry for your family's loss, especially. Um, I'll say this: the loss of a child is a special hell, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone.
It
You know,
is. We've I've been to a lot of funerals. Coming from a big family, I think the first funeral I attended was that I can remember attending was when I was 13.
mm,
And then, like, there was like, for the next few years, a bunch of older people in my family who I knew of them but didn't know them well, like, would die off, right? And
yeah,
it seems like the older you get, this, it circles close. And the year before we found out that my nephew was sick, my dad got really sick. He had a heart attack. And he was out internationally. He was visiting back, the home country. And that was terrifying, right? Because not only were we not immediately available to be with him, but he was in a foreign country where the medical care just wasn't good, right?
yeah,
And as scary as that was, right? Just the thought, when my nephew got sick, just, you don't know, right? You don't want to think about the eventuality. Just the thought of that was like 10 times worse. Like, how do you value one person over the other? But it was. I think you can, if you believe in God, you might say that, God builds it into us. Or if you don't believe in God, you might say that it's biologically programmed into our genome to say that you have to protect the children at all cost, even if they're not your own, but they're part of your clan. And even if they're not part of your clan, there's something programmed in us to protect the children as much as
right.
you can. So when one gets sick, it's supposed to hurt, right? So
Yeah.
that they survive.
What's
Um, yeah,
kids are innocent.
right. Hmm.
They're innocent.
Yeah, yeah. And so it was. That experience was kind of like being on a boat that was going down, right? And
Yeah,
it didn't matter what, like, it was going down, and we're going down with it, right? Like, it's going down. There's nothing you can do about it. So it's just a terrible feeling. And it should be, because It represents a lot of things. It represents obviously the loss of life, but also the loss of the future, right? In a way, for the family. So.
This is really interesting that you bring that up, the future, because the guest I was speaking with last night, we talked about that, the with a child, or during a pregnancy, losing, in that instance, losing a child. You don't, it's not just mourning, the here and now and the past. It really is mourning what could have been.
Hmm.
And it's, you see so much possibility and so much potential, and especially in kids. This is what I love about kids, and this is what I think is great about kids. Is kids, they have the tendency to make fun and lightheartedness out of any situation.
Hmm.
you know it's something that's built into them. They, over time, it feels like, gets taken away, is this idea of, okay, I'm in this situation, but how is this a game, or how can I make this a toy? And they have this ability, so there's that, it's that innocence in them, and it feels like it makes it 1,000 times worse and 1,000 times harder.
Yeah, yeah. It's kids are interesting. I'm 42. I don't know how old you are. I don't think I've ever picked up on it. And I've never been married, and I don't have any children of my own. Recently, in the past year, um, a niece of mine in America, she'd be like my second cousin once removed or something like that. But in
Yeah,
Mexico, anybody who's like your um like one tier down from you on the family tree is just a niece, right? Or a
yeah.
niece, nephew. Um, and she and her baby came to stay with us, and all of a sudden we have a baby in the house again, right? And I'm 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 their guardian. I well, not officially. The government handed them over to me, and so I've been playing like a stepfather or foster dad to this
Yeah.
little boy, and it's really weird, right? Because at my age, like the idea of maybe being a father is starting to like you're starting to get okay with the fact that like this might not be a thing for you, right?
Yeah.
And that's okay, right? Not everybody needs to have children, but it's I'm getting a little taste of it, and there's parts of it that are really cool. Um, there's parts of it that are really hard.
Yeah.
I,
That There's nothing easy, but, I'll call that out. There's nothing easy about being a parent or about having kids that you are responsible for. It's not
Mhm,
easy, but there are a lot of
mhm.
parts of it that can be really fun.
Yeah, and so seeing, the thing that I'm most impressed at, right? And now I've got 14 nieces and nephews,
Oh, wow.
that I've watched grow up around the house, right? Grow up around my parents' house, and they're all big now for the most part. And I think when they were growing up, I didn't pay as much attention, right? Because you're just not paying attention. I think there's a part of you that says, "Oh, I'll get to experience that maybe down the line, and maybe it'll be different," or you just don't pay attention. And with this little boy, like I find myself taking mental snapshots of
Yeah.
like these little milestones that he goes through, and so it's kind of neat, right? And it's also terrifying, right? Because
I know exactly what you mean.
it's neat and it's terrifying. It's terrifying for me because I find myself getting attached to this little boy that may not be in my life in 5 years, right?
Yeah.
Because they may not live with me forever, but in the meantime, you can't live with a baby for more than a few weeks without getting attached to them, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah.
I remember my wife one time worked a customer facing job, and a woman
Mhm.
came in and she was helping her, and she had her small child with her, and she was just rude to this kid, and my wife, just, I remember her telling me, like, if she had just handed me that baby and just walked out, I would have brought her home and said, "Look, we'll figure it out." And
Uh-huh.
it's, you're right, though. It's that innate. She had no attachment or no connection to this woman or to this child. But yeah, if she had just handed her over, immediately she'd be like, okay, we're taking care of her and we will figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah, like that's those things never get planned, right? You
Yeah.
just all of a sudden this is the reality now. Right? Like if you would have asked me a year and a half ago, hey, there's going to be a baby suddenly in your life. Oh, and by the way, there's going to be a teenager in your life as well, who's the baby's mom. And
Get ready.
uh you get ready, and I would have been like, that's a terrible idea. Why would I do that? Right? Except that when you find out that there's danger, right?
Yeah.
And that they're at risk, there's just something that, you know, you either take it on or you don't. And you don't think about it. You don't think about what is going to happen 6 months, a year down the line. You're just like, they're in danger, get them out of danger, and then we'll deal with it. Exactly what you just said is what I thought when
Get him
the situation presented itself.
get him safe and then figure it out.
Right. Yeah.
It's
So
that's the right call.
yeah, and it's been a blessing. Look, for as many for as many nights have I spent, when you're the guardian of two minors that are not your children, right? The government, not the government, like hospitals and stuff won't treat them unless you're present,
Mm.
right? So for both of them, almost immediately after she got here, the mom, my niece, she had a issue with the gallbladder and had to come out.
Oh no.
And I think I think I spent 72 hours in the hospital with her. And this is during COVID protocol, so like it's you can't, like, getting back in, like I was terrified to leave the building, to because then like we're not fitting the actual mold of anything, right? I'm not her dad, right?
Yeah.
I'm this like adult that needs to be around to really only to authorize treatment. um and then having to prove, you have different surnames, so you have to prove that you're supposed to be back there. um so it was just one of those things where I just stayed, and it was a challenge. And then, like, at the same time, like I must have spent several days like inside the emergency room for her, and then the baby back and forth, because he didn't have medical insurance right away, so the only options were to take him to the emergency room. um and I'm fine with it. Like, right, like you got to take care of them, but it's just like you don't think about these things if you're not a parent, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure, like, now when I talk to other parents, and I'm like, you didn't nobody talks about that, why, like, there's like a conspiracy, like you can't talk about it because then nobody will ever have kids, right? Like,
Yeah. Well, no, it's funny when my wife was pregnant. I remember, everyone we told was excited for us, and everyone was like, "Oh, it's great, it's amazing," and it is, and I'll never say that it's not.
Mhm.
However, I had one person who was a general manager that I worked for. He told me, he said, "Oh, congratulations! I heard you're expecting," and I was like, "Yeah." And he said, "That's great, that's wonderful. I'll only give you one piece of advice, and this is something that somebody told me when my wife was pregnant with our first, and it's that everyone tells you how good it is, and it's true, but that first 6 months is hard, and that's okay. It's
Mhm.
supposed to be hard. That's normal. You're not failing. It's just hard." And I'll tell you, there were many nights during that first 6 months where colic and reflux, and just reminding myself that, yeah, it's this to be expected, that this is hard, so this is not surprising.
Yeah.
um
The best advice that I've gotten so far, and it's really helped me a lot, I can't remember who said it because I wish I could give them credit, is everything is a phase, right? He yells at the top of his lung, it's a
yeah.
phase, right? like when we first got him, they came from Mexico, right? So my niece says that she swears up and down that they didn't, but I know that they did. They were driving around without, like in Mexico, car seats are not like a standard thing like they are here.
Yeah.
So when we would put the baby in it, he would like lose his mind, right? Because he doesn't like, he hadn't been accustomed to being in a car seat, and he, like, he would scream like bloody murder every time we put him in the car seat. And eventually, now even today, like not like he's pretty good, but every once in a while he'll still lose his mind. And that, so we've been through different phases of that, and like he is going through like different things, and I just say, okay, it's got to be a phase, right? We just got to wait it out.
Yeah, that's a pretty good way to look at it because it's yeah. There's a lot of phases, and as they get older, it's even more so because there's just more stuff that they're exposed to and learn about, and
Hmm.
so that they want to try it out. So
Yeah,
it's
you know,
cool though to get to see them grow and get to see them
yeah.
turn into themselves.
I think the thing that it most impresses me, that I'm noticing about helping to raise this little boy is the amnesia that kids have, right? Like they,
Yeah,
like they will be like, right now we're at the point where we're starting to do timeouts and stuff because he's starting to throw tantrums over.
yeah.
It's really funny to watch because we say that there must be this little kid there must be a kid in his daycare that is like laying down and like like to throw a tantrum because he tries to do it, but he's not good at it. Like he doesn't quite know, like have the mechanics of throwing himself to the floor. So he kind of goes like, have you ever seen Kevin Hart describe how Shaq falls, where it, like he falls in phases, and that's exactly what this guy. That's what, like he kneels down first to make sure he doesn't get hit, like he doesn't like, hurt himself, like it's a total fake fall.
It's a
And
multi-step process.
yeah, and so we started to discipline him and putting him in timeouts and stuff. And like it's funny because he or maybe I'm just feel like, because I'm the bad guy, right? I play bad cop,
Yeah,
and I put him in the timeout, and I'll sit there with him, and like it totally feels like he hates me, right? But then like he'll go to sleep, and the next morning he's like, hey, he's totally happy to see you, and I'm like, man, I go, kids must have amnesia, right? Because
they they
they don't
do. They
hold
have a
any
tendency
grudges.
to yeah. They
Yeah,
have a tendency to be able to move on pretty quick,
yeah,
which is good. Even though you can then still like I remember you were just mad at me,
uh-huh,
and I'm still a little mad that you were mad at me, but I'm also not trying to start a fight today, so we're just gonna keep moving.
yeah.
Well,
So,
I do wanna shift over a little bit.
mhm.
The podcast we do talk about loss and grief, and so every episode I do like to encourage my guests to talk about the person who who is that person that you wanted to speak about today. So, would you mind telling us who we were going to talk about today?
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about my friend who I met in college, and I'm going to use a different name. I'm not going to say his actual name because he is gone. He passed
Certainly.
away. But on the off chance that his mother and father find this episode, there are some hard things that I want to talk about that maybe they're not okay with sharing.
Yeah.
But this is really hard, right? Because I'm sharing my experience of my friend, right? So I'm gonna
Right.
just refer to him as Tony. Um, and I met Tony in I was a transfer student to UC Berkeley, right? I had when I first graduated high school, I started going to school at Cal Poly Pomona, and got promptly kicked out because I was a knucklehead. And I spent a couple of years, kind of like trying to find my like whatever I was going to do next, and kind of
Yeah.
trying to live down the shame of having been kicked out of school. And then I eventually got my stuff together and went back to a community college here in California and worked my way through it, and ended up at UC Berkeley almost as a fluke, right? Complete fluke, because I got sick in the last semester before transferring, and I so when you're a transfer student, you have to tell the colleges that you're going to what you're going to take in that last semester. Because I'd been sick, I got dropped like from half my classes, and so
Oh wow.
a lot of the schools will tell you, well, you're gonna have to reapply, right? And that's exactly what happened. My dream school was UCLA.
Yeah.
I have five siblings, and all of them had been at UCLA. Um, a couple of them transferred out to other schools, but um, we were a brewing house, right? We have been cursed from the very beginning. Um, and I so I wanted to go there. I wanted to be just like my I wanted to continue that tradition, but they told me sorry, but you're gonna have to try again. But when I called UC Berkeley, I they told me just finish what you have left with the B or better, and then we'll see you in the fall. But Berkeley was like I got in, and I remember filling out the paper application. That's how long ago it was, and you just ticked all the boxes, right? And I said Berkeley, why not? What do I got
Yeah.
to lose? And I'm glad I did because it ended up being the only school that would still take me with all the the classes I had left. And because I was older, I was only I was like 2 years older than everybody. I was 2 years behind basically.
Yeah.
Looking back now, I was like, what was the rush, right?
I took 2 years off of school between finishing my associates at 20 and then going back to finish my bachelor's. I,
uh,
I know what you mean. It is that feeling of I really didn't rush that bad. It wasn't that bad. But I remember thinking like, oh man, I'm way older than all these other kids, and I feel out of place for that. I was 2 years older.
mhm. Yeah, yeah, and they looked at you like you were really old, probably,
Yeah,
right? Because that's how
yeah. It's
they
like, well, and I had a full time job, so like, oh my god, you have a job and responsibilities and rent. I don't under. It's
yeah,
like, yeah, I'm. The thing is, like, I'm just trying to figure it out, just like you are. That's just I got myself into a crappy situation to do it. That's all.
yeah, yeah. My entire life has been like that. Like, how much pain do I need to endure before before I do the
Like,
thing that I have to do, right?
yeah,
That I'm
I'm
supposed
gonna
to
do
do.
it the hard way first.
Yeah, anybody could do it the easy way, right?
I can relate to that.
Yeah, you should try getting kicked out of college and then go back, and then I'd be impressed, right? Then I'd be impressed. But yeah, so I ended up at UC Berkeley. So I transferred into UC Berkeley, and UC Berkeley had these transfer dorms. Basically, the entire dorm, seven stories, were just nothing but transfer students, and that's where I met my friend Tony. Um, and Tony is I want to say Middle Eastern descent. He was Bangladeshi,
Yeah.
and he was an interesting guy, right? And now I'm putting air quotes there around that. I think, and I don't know this for sure, but I'm positive that he might have been on the spectrum.
Yeah.
Um, because he was socially awkward. He could make friends, but he had a hard time keeping them. And
Mm,
um, and it's because he was kind of quirky, right? Um, and the reason I give all the background about the dorms and having transferred there is because in order to really understand the whole story is um, you have to understand the people that were around them and around me. Um,
yeah, that makes sense to me.
I've always said this, and partially it's because I'm trying to make it true. Is that I've always been blessed with being around the best people, right? Like
Yeah.
and I really mean it. Like I went to jury duty once, and I ended up in a room with like 14 amazing people, right? Like I really did. Like it
You may
was
the
like
only
one of these. What's that?
you may be the only person who's ever said or thought that.
You know what? I look forward to going to jury duty, right? Not only because it's my civic duty, right? Because I love the idea of being able to give something back.
Yeah.
But I also at that time was being paid. I could have stayed on that jury for 2 years, and the company I work for would have paid for it. But no, truth to everything I say about always being around the greatest people is I ended up in like this jury with like it was so interesting because there was such a mix of people, right? Of people of like I had we were with we had a gentleman who was a former Navy submarine engineer, right? So this guy works at a nuclear power plant, right? And
Wow.
like he was like I don't know, I don't remember his rank, and I don't want to speculate what it was, but he was high up there, and he was talking about going to the Navy game, Navy Army, and he was just super like this gung ho guy, and just like like an amazing man, right? We were talking about his, because you're not allowed to talk about the case, right?
Yeah.
But anything like just kind of like we're talking now, he would tell us, talking to about us about his experiences, and it was just like, wow, right? Like I can't believe I got to meet this guy.
Yeah.
And then there was a guy that he was like a contractor, and when you would see this guy on the street, you probably walk the other way, right? He had like all tatted up, and he had like the piercings were like the stretching of the ears, and he had a lot of like a lot of jewelry, a lot of hardware on him, and I wouldn't have suspected him be somebody that I would approach, but after meeting him, I found him to be amazing. Like we were just really lucky, and then we were split on the decision for the case, and I can't believe how respectful everybody was, right? Because we kept saying like, hey, you have to, we might put somebody in jail,
Yeah.
right? And you have to live with that. You have to go to sleep and be able to sleep with that, right? So we're not agreed. We're not going to pressure anybody here. And everybody came away, and we ended up being a hung jury after like a week of deliberation.
Oh wow.
Um, but everybody was great with it, and so just like that, ending up at UC Berkeley, I was on a floor with like the most amazing people, right? Not the entire floor, but like the majority of the floor became really tight knit. Like we became a family.
Yeah.
And Tony was part of that, right?
Yeah.
And like when I mean that we were tight, like we would go like we would have dinner together. We would walk down to the commons and have dinner together. We would wait for each other. We would go to like the rallies together, the football games together. We would um we would go to church together, right? Like a bunch of us were Hispanic, Mexican Americans, and probably never went to church with our mothers while we were home. But for whatever but for whatever reason, we started going to the local parish on campus, and eventually it was like everybody would go, including Tony, right? Because um he wasn't he wasn't Christian, he was Muslim in fact, but he would go and just to support us because it was like everybody's going, I'm going to,
It's
right?
community.
It was community, exactly. And so he was a part of that, and he used to do things that would drive me crazy, right? Because again, he was a little odd, and he didn't understand. Like he would do things sometimes that like he just couldn't understand why it would bother us or bother me specifically. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like I don't want to give. There's this one example that stands out. It's kind of gross, so I'm not gonna say it. But
Fair enough.
just the end result was we were down at 3 in the morning washing my comforter, right? Because
We'll let the audience fill in the gaps there.
and it's not what you're thinking. It's not. No, I just as I'm saying that, it's not what you're thinking. But it was like, it was yeah. I was not going to sleep on my bedding anymore without it
Fair
being
enough.
washed. Yeah, and so he was lucky in the sense, and I was too. He was lucky in the sense that for a guy that probably had a hard time making friends his entire life, that he found a group um that took him in, right? And
Yeah.
and we picked on him, right? Like
Well,
we
guy friends,
yeah.
that's what we do though, is we if I've
Hmm.
explained this to my wife before, I've got three really close male friends who are like brothers to me, and I expect the three of us or the four of us to be able to relentlessly make fun of each other or give each other a hard time.
Yeah.
And it's just part of it.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. Like my one of my best friends, I'm his best friend, but he thinks that I'm his best friend. Like anyways, he likes to say that I'm his best friend. And I said, "Yeah, you are." I am. I'm totally your best friend. I go, "But you're one of my best friends." I like to mess with him. But
Yeah.
anyways, his wife can't understand why we're so mean to each other.
That's how guys communicate.
Yeah. It's like if I didn't like him, I wouldn't say anything to him.
Exactly.
um so Tony, in fact there was this time where Tony was being bullied by these other kids in the dorm. I want to say that you got to remember this is like we're in like 2004, 2005, so we're
Yeah.
not that far removed from 9/11. And anybody who looked um, Arab or Middle Eastern um, was being persecuted in certain realms, right?
Yeah.
And so there was these guys that like were picking on them, like bullying him, like and we it was hard to believe because we thought, we're at UC Berkeley, right? We're at the liberal, mecca of of schools, right? And he didn't say
Still.
anything to us for a long time. And one day, like I think it got to him, and he was just like, we could just visually see that something was wrong. And so we're like, "What's up, man?" He's like, "Well, there's these two guys from like the fourth floor that are, every time I see them, I'm trying to avoid." Like he was taking the stairs to try to avoid these guys, right?
Oh my
And as
god.
soon as we found out, man, we went up there and banged, like we banged on that door so damn hard. I thought the hinges were gonna come off. There was just one guy on our floor that he was just like a beast, right?
Yeah.
Um, and we straight up told him, I go, you do not, you see him coming, you go the other way, right? Because like you don't mess with him, we mess with him because he's our boy, right?
Yeah.
Um, and we took care of that. We nipped that in the bud right away. But yeah, that's where I met him, and God, I feel like I'm, I feel like
No,
I
that's
feel like I'm there again.
well,
I'm
that's the
smiling.
point of this is
Yeah,
to get to talk about that person.
yeah. Um, so, and this is where the food comes in, right? When we first started talking, and Andrew, I had a hard time thinking about that, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I'm glad that we went through the exercise because my last meal with him was a few years ago, and it wasn't a good meal. It wasn't a good outcome.
Mm.
But the majority of my meals with him that I really think back of that kind of just became like got lost in the ether were, we were at UC Berkeley, and I think this is true of most college towns, is you have a lot of good, really cheap food
Yeah. You
around.
have to.
Yeah. And like I just was thinking about all the places that like and this guy was a foodie. He would have loved this guy.
Yeah.
He um he was always like, "Oh, let's go to like." So there's this place called Fat Slice and Blondie's. There were these two pizza parlors like within a block of both of our dorm, right? Like you could like they were close enough where it's like, I want Blondie's, Tony wants Tony wants Fat Slice. We can do that,
Yeah.
right?
You can make it happen.
We can make that happen. Like I'll meet you and I'll meet you in 5 minutes, right? Because and you get a slice and a drink for $4 at the time. It was like a deal, and because most of us had like a meal plan for
Yeah.
the dorms, and the food was good, but the food all tasted the same after a while. Um, like it was like buffet style, right? So
Yeah.
you knew that on Wednesdays they were gonna have um pot roast, for example, or they were going to have spaghetti on Thursdays, and it became very predictable. In my opinion, the food was good, but again, it was repetitive, and like there was like this like there was a common ingredient amongst all of it, so it so it all tasted kind of the same after a while. So you would definitely be like, okay, I'm gonna go get a slice of pizza, or there's a place down the way called the Asian Ghetto. I don't know why they called it that. But it had a bunch of like different like Asian food restaurants. I think that's why they called it the Asian Ghetto.
Yeah.
And but amongst it, there was this amazing Italian place, right? And I spent the better part of 2 years trying everything on that menu. Uh, and then there was this place called Cow Heroes that I'll still like if I'm in the area, right? If I'm remotely anywhere in the Bay Area, I'll find a reason to get down there and have one.
I know the kind of places you're talking about whenever I think about, my the area where my college is or was. There's
Yeah.
just certain spots you gotta hit.
Yeah, exactly. Like you didn't go there. Like, did you even really go if you
Yeah.
didn't have right? Like you're gonna have to go back and or you have to give your degree back. or
Yeah.
something, right?
Yeah, we're taking that away from you.
Yeah. um, and so there's just this bunch of really good food around. One of our favorites was Top Dog. It's like this little hot dog stand, and they have like the different, like you could just get a regular hot dog, but they had like the lemon pepper dog and the apple. I forget what they're called, but the great part. I go on a lot of tangents. I don't know if you can tell,
No,
but
you
the
you're fine.
the great part about this place was you had to learn how to order. There were like, imagine hot dog stand meets soup Nazi,
That's exactly
and
what I was thinking of.
like you better know what you want when you get to the front of that line,
Yeah.
because not only will they yell at you, but everybody behind you is like, "The hell's wrong with you?" You
So it's
had to
dinner and a show.
yeah, like you could tell who the freshmen were, right? Because they would sit there and ponder their order at the front, like for a nanosecond too long, and they would get berated. Uh, and this place was open to 4 a.m.
Oh
every day.
wow.
Like, yeah, so this was like one of the best places, and it's one of like it was like one of those things he's all like. I remember Tony would come into my room, um, like at 2 in the morning. Sometimes he'd be like, I need a top dog, and it was literally a half a block away from us. So it was like, okay, yeah, we can do that, right? Like, no problem, we can make that happen. Um, and so, but one of the play like this was just like, I thinking back to him, like he just was totally into food. But one of the places that he loved the most was probably this place called Naan and Curry. Right, they would make the hot bread, the hot like pita style bread,
Yeah.
and they had all these dipping sauces, right? And that was their $4 entry, right? The get four, get a little stack of bread with the different sauce that you picked and a drink. That, like, I'm telling you, every place had like I'm sure that's like a $10 entry now,
Yeah.
right? But but every restaurant had some form of like, I want my fix of something, for around that price point. And Mikkel find it, Tony found all of that stuff. And he was, um, man, I'm. It was one of the best times of my life, just being around him and that entire group.
Yeah.
And I miss him, man. I'm really missing him right now.
How long has it been
Um,
since he's been gone?
he passed away in September of 2019. So he missed the pandemic. I
Yeah.
don't know if he would have made it through it, to be honest. He had I found out after he died that he was a schizophrenic,
Hmm.
bipolar. Um I'm speculating on that a little bit because I didn't hear it from his parents. I heard it from his another friend who had been
Yeah.
close to him as he before he passed away. Um so man, I'm feeling um like two sides of him, right? Like after we graduated, he actually grew up not far from where I grew up. We were
Really?
maybe 20 minutes apart, and so we naturally would just run into each other all the time, or we would try to get together and spend time together, right? Because I don't know about you, but after college, I was like, man, like you go from like hanging out with these guys.
You don't get to see him
Um,
that often. A couple
yeah,
times a year, maybe.
like I was thinking about just now about Devin and the gentleman that he was really close to,
Yeah.
the friend that he lost touch with. And I was thinking about how, like, after you get ripped apart, right? Like everybody goes their separate ways. And I tend to want to like make that reconnect with people. Um, and it's kind of like coming home, right? You never really come home, right? When you leave somewhere, like when you leave home, you have this idea about what home was when you left, the instant you left it, and when you come back, of course, it's never the same because people have developed, grow, they leave. And it's kind of that same thing, like where you're trying to recapture, like with your college buddies. I feel like I'm always trying to recapture that, those times that we were there, and those times are gone, right? It's great to be able to visit them in our memories, but those times, that version of us, and that place and time is gone,
Yeah.
right?
It's
Um,
it's I know exactly the feeling you're talking about, because and it's not even that you're like, oh, I wish I was young again, being carefree, but I think about, sitting around our those three friends I mentioned, I won't lie, I miss sitting with them, eating pizza, playing video games, having a few beers, and just talking crap to each other.
yeah,
And and we still stay in contact. We have a group chat that we use, but we're kind of spread out now, and if we're lucky, we all see each other once a year at the same time.
hmm,
um but yeah, you're right. You miss those people in that time.
yeah, yeah. I think, the so after I graduated, I spent 4 years working here back home. I started working for this marketing company that had Coors Brewing as a client,
Yeah.
and so I worked for them, and then eventually I left the company to go work for this other company, kind of doing something similar. And I think in 45 days I realized I had made a huge mistake.
Mm.
So I started talking to my old boss, and he's all, "Yeah, we have you can come back, but we only have a position available up in the Bay Area again, San Francisco Bay Area." So I was desperate.
Yeah.
I desperately wanted to leave that other company, and I went. I snapped and I said, "Okay, it's right in the area where I went to school, so I'll just move back to UC to Berkeley." And so I did, and I spent another 2 years up there. And I want to say for like the first 3 months, I mourned. Like I thought I was going home in a different way, and the people are gone that were there when you were there.
Yeah.
Um, so you're mourning that in a way, and then, but then you find it again, right? It becomes something different, right? Um, it's also good, but it's not what it was. It can't be, right?
it,
Because yeah,
that's why I
sorry.
don't think you can compare them, though. That I think it's human nature to want to compare times and places like that. But
Hmm.
you're right, though. I mean, because I know you said that you do find home in a way, in a sense, but it's not what you left behind before. So it's hard to. It's not going to stack up in the same way. I mean, it can still be good, but it's just not going to be the same.
Yeah, yeah, it's exactly right. The place is still cool or great. It's just it's different every time you come back to it.
Yeah.
And that's just because your experiences and the people you get to know there are different. Um, but anyhow, going back to to Tony, um, I so he passed away, and he before he died, we had stopped talking to each other. Um, we had a falling out,
Yeah.
and it was really hard for me because he took it to his grave. He didn't die suddenly. He died slowly over a few months, and he got sick very shortly after we had last spoken. And I thought to myself, this is a man that died with not many friends. He had maybe one or two people.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, whatever. Like we had a argument, right? But I don't. I just can't imagine why he couldn't have picked up the phone and said, I'm sick, right? I'm dying." And I would have been like, "Oh my god," right? Whatever was between us didn't matter, right? But
Yeah.
it was that argument had been there was a lot of lead up to that argument because he was doing things that were big. Now looking back, they were big red flags of mental health problems.
I was going to ask. So, you think the argument probably it sounds like it maybe stemmed more from from mental health than from just a clash of personalities.
Yeah. It was. He had a difficulty with boundaries,
Yeah,
and he had crossed a boundary that I called him out on because it was so basically what had happened is at some point he had met some friends of mine from high school. One of them being a female that
yeah,
I continue to be close to. I'm actually really close to her and to her husband because I know both of them really well.
yeah,
But at the time that he met her, she was single, and we had gone out like to a bar and had a good time. But in between, like us graduating college, shortly after we graduated college, and you know the year he passed away had passed um 10 years, 12 years,
yeah,
right? So in the meantime, she had become a mother. Her and my friend had gotten married, right? And he had hit her up on Facebook, kind of like trying to spark something up, trying to like go party with her in some way.
yeah,
I don't necessarily think he was trying to gauge her interest, but it was inappropriate, right?
yeah.
And she sent me a screenshot of a message he had sent to her, and it was ambiguous. There wasn't anything like specifically like he hadn't a proposition to her or anything,
Yeah,
but
but
but it
yeah,
was she was like, I can't have this, right?
yeah,
um and so I messaged him and I said, hey man, you can't message her. She's married, she has a child, like that. She doesn't, it's not cool, right?
right.
And after that, um we got in this huge fight, right? Over text. We didn't even get to talk, right? And I just thought about that. My last words to him were not in person or over the phone. They were over a text message. Um, he so before that he had been going through a lot. Like he was homeless, not
Oh
because
wow.
not because he wasn't working. He couldn't afford it. He was obsessed with not spending money. So he would he was doing this behaviors where, okay, so he had been gotten in trouble. He was arrested at one point, and I think it was because he was trespassing at night at a gym in Southern California, like one of these high end gyms
Yeah,
that they charge you a few hundred, like $100 or whatever a month, maybe two. Um, and they would stay open really late, and it was like multi floor, it's a huge facility. And what it sounded like, it was that he had been like, he would go in there really late and lay at the pool and then pretend to fall asleep. Um, and he would sleep there, like sometimes overnight, right? Like all night. He would basically hide in the gym and use their shower facilities and whatnot. And eventually he got caught. And I think when he got caught, he, instead of just saying, "Hey, I'm gonna go," right? I got caught. I think he made a scene out of it, and they arrested him, and
oh
he was
wow.
in jail. Um, and that, it's these parts the why I want to change his name, because I don't know these things for sure, right?
No, I understand, and
This
that
is just, yeah,
no,
this
that
is
that
just what
makes
I've
total
heard.
sense.
Yeah, and so like I started to pick up on little things he would do. So like once or twice a month he would call me and say, "Hey man, you want to go to a movie?" Right? And I'd be like, "Yeah, let's go to a movie."
Yeah,
But he was always engineering a way. So he would say, "Let's go to this movie," right? Like I can't really, like I want to go to this movie, but here's the show times, I can make this one. And I'd be like, "Okay, I can do that." Right? So they'd always be like a late showing. We'd go to the movie, and then we of course would get out late, sometimes after 1 o'clock in the morning. And he would say, "Hey man, it's a little late for me to drive back all the way back to Irvine, which is about 40 minutes from where I live." And He's all, and I would say, oh, why don't you just crash at the house, right?
Yeah.
What I later came to find out is that he was manipulating that whole situation, right? Because he didn't
To
have
have a,
anywhere to stay.
he was looking for a place to sleep.
Yeah, and if he would have just said, "Hey, man, I'm in trouble and I have nowhere to stay tonight," of course, I would have said, "Hey, yeah." But it wasn't the thing that triggered it. Right? Like I was like I wasn't paying attention to it at all until he was like, "Hey, would you mind if I leave some clothes here? Like, can I hang these clothes in your house?" And I remember thinking, "No, you can't do that." Right? Not because it was going to bother me, but I wasn't going to support. I wasn't going to enable him to continue to live that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I know that's not calling somebody out, especially somebody you care about. That's not easy.
It
You know,
wasn't.
there's nothing
And
easy about that.
yeah, and he took it like he got really pissed, and I said there's no reason why you cannot have somewhere to live, right? You work. He was doing really well. He was making good
Yeah.
money. Um and there's plenty of places where you can get a room. Um or if you don't, go back to your parents' house, right? Um I'm sure that they're lovely people.
Yeah.
Um and he he was really upset with the fact that I thought that he should get a have somewhere to live, right? Like have like a place, and that I wasn't supporting this lifestyle, right? Because I get it. Look, if you're at a point where you're living in your car, and you literally have no place to go, then I will bend over backwards to help you.
Right.
But you know there was something about it that just it irked me, and I said I'm not going to support that. Um, so then it was after that like he got arrested and whatnot. He had a falling out with his dad as well. Um, his parents are very traditional, but very nice people,
Yeah.
and he didn't want to live under their house because they had rules, right? They had rules, and he didn't want to follow them. I don't know. But then, so when he got arrested, and I know this now, but didn't know it then, he disappeared. Um, and his family reached out to me, like through Facebook, or I don't know how they got a hold of me, and they asked me to come over, so I did, and they explained that he had a falling out with them. He had come to fisticuffs with his father at one point, and he he left, and he stopped talking to them, and that must have been devastating for them, but they could keep tabs on him because they continue at that point. They were paying for his car, like
Yeah.
a payment for his car. They were paying for his insurance. They would pay for his phone, like he was on a family plan with them,
Yeah. So
so
they
that
could.
they could see that he was making phone calls and text messages, etc. He had a credit card that for emergencies, and every once in a while he would buy something for himself, like food, right? Like he wasn't the type to cook, so they would see, like again, he was a foodie, so he would buy himself food, right?
Yeah.
And then they would get parking tickets in the mail because the vehicle was in their name. Um, and then all of a sudden it all stopped, right? He wasn't making phone calls anymore. He wasn't, he wasn't buying any food. The car was getting tickets, parking tickets, and it was in the same spot. So they were terrified.
Oh no.
So that's why they reached out. And so I said, okay, I'm gonna try to reach out to him via Facebook, not knowing, just to say, hey, I'm what's going on, man? How you doing? Let's go get a beer, or let's go grab some food so that I could like smoke him out, right? Like to get,
Yeah.
like, and he didn't respond. So in the meantime, I got a picture of him, made a bunch of flyers, and just walked around. The city of Irvine is it's a very conservative area. Um, but it's like a very it's like on the beach.
Yeah.
It's a kind of expensive area, and they have, you know, it's where he always wanted to be at, right? Like I think if he would have lived and eventually gotten his act together, he probably would have ended up buying a home there.
Yeah.
Um, and so I just went around to, like, you know, we knew where like his regular haunts were, right? Because, you know, we could see where we'd buy food, and you know, I just showed them a picture and I go, "Have you seen this guy?" And people would say like, "Yeah, I've seen him before, but I haven't seen him recently." And we just kept trying to look for him, and eventually he messaged me on Facebook. And then as soon as he did, I messaged his parents and I said, he's alive. He's talking to me, and so they were relieved. Later on, he came back. He didn't speak to me for like a good year after that,
Yeah.
because he was so pissed that I would violate his trust. And, you know,
But
again,
it was out of
he was
care
my
though.
it was out of care, and he was my boy. And I remember yelling at him, saying, "I don't care. Like, your mother thinks you're dead in a ditch somewhere."
Yeah, you can be mad
Um,
at me, but I'm gonna make sure that you're alive and that she can sleep at
yeah,
night.
yeah. So after that, again, he started he got his act together. He was renting rooms, you know, like at $800 a pop, which is pretty cheap for out here now. And like, he had couple different places that he stayed at. And then I remember the last place he stayed at, like, it was just like one of those things where, I think when you rent a room, when you're under somebody's house, like, people have certain expectations of what's okay and what's not.
Yeah.
And he had trouble with that. Um, and he was like, you know, the guy's giving me a hard time. And I was like, dude, I don't blame him, right? Like, you know, like like, he would always leave food. Um, like, he would buy food and then not take it out, like the containers and stuff.
Just leave it.
Um, just leave it, and of course it would start to smell, and of course, like, that's gonna call rodents and all kinds of
Yeah,
pests.
that
Yeah. And so he never quite understood why it was such a big deal, right? It was his space, and he's right, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, but
it's like technically
yeah,
technically correct, but still not right.
yeah. Like, I go, why isn't it a problem for yourself, right? Like, you should not want to be living in with food around, like, spoiling food around you, right?
Yeah.
Um. Anyhow, he was doing better, and then but he was having a hard time finding work now, because he had a record, right?
Yeah.
And he had gotten this job, and this is where the last meal comes in. He had gotten a job interview for this place, and there was some database management that needed to that was involved in the job description, and he just didn't have the skill set, right? He was an economics major, by the way. This guy was brilliant. He was an economics major, and he was just really smart. um and he had really good gigs. He was like an analyst at different places, but he did not have like an IT or a programming background at all, database
Yeah.
stuff. And I dabbled in it. I had worked for my brother for a while, so I understood databases. And I said, look, I can try to help you, coach you through some of this stuff, because they wanted access, experience in access.
Yeah.
And I didn't know access that well, but I understood the big concepts. And I said, we can sit and we can have we can go over things that you can talk about, and that way you can get through this interview, right? um and so we did. We met at this pizza place in Chino Hills, California, is where he's from. And he got upset, right? Like, it was on him. He had offered, and I looked at the menu and I said, oh, let's order this pizza. And it was a little bit more than I think he was expecting to spend,
Yeah.
right? And instead of just saying, hey, I know I offered, but I can't swing that right now, maybe,
Yeah.
he just went ahead and paid, and it became like a thing of later that he was like super pissed about. um and, you know, we helped him. I helped him go through the interview process, but and he probably would have got the job, because they did a background check, and then they told him no, right? If you get to a background check, it's because they're probably going to hire you, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah.
um and I didn't think anything of it then, but he like I thought it was just a really good meal. The pizza was great. Like it was like a customized pizza. I think it was like $28, right? And um it was just one of many meals that we had had together, but ended up being our last meal together. And when I think back about it now, when I called him out about the thing with my friend that he had been messaging her, he, the last thing he said to me is, "You owe me $15." Right? Because he had done the math that like it, the
Based on how,
$15 was the excess that he had planned. Right? Like he had planned a certain amount,
yeah,
and we like because I had ordered it, it was $15 more than he had planned to spend. Right?
yeah.
And I said okay. I wrote him a check and I sent it to him in the mail. And I don't even know if he cashed it, to be honest. I don't know because the next thing I heard was the next time that I heard anything about him was when his mom called me to tell me that he had passed away. Um, and as soon as I saw that, as soon as I saw her call, Andrew, I knew what it was. I knew that he was gone. I don't know
You,
how I knew.
you just felt it in your. It's.
Yeah,
I
like
guess
he's
it's one of those things almost visceral.
yeah. Um, as soon as I saw her caller ID come up, I was like, something happened to him, and I assumed, like as she was like, as soon as I picked up the phone, she was I just heard crying, right, and I was waiting for her to tell me that maybe he had hung himself, or maybe he had done something dangerous, right,
Yeah,
like maybe like I assumed that he took his life, and turns out he had some sort of lifelong issue with triglycerides, and there was this like medication that he just needed to take on a regular basis and wasn't doing it. Um, and so he got really sick and he spiraled inside of the hospital. Um, and it sounded like he just didn't care anymore.
yeah,
And but once he got really close to death, he like like they say that people that commit suicide, um, like like there's people wonder you know like okay, you're able to throw yourself off the bridge, but at what point do people like regret it? Do like is there like a moment before impact that they're like, oh my god, what have I done? Right? And he got there medically, and so he did commit suicide, right? Because all he had to do was take care of himself with really simple treatment, and he just couldn't
yeah.
do it. Um, and I went to his funeral. Um, the Muslim community buries their people like the next day, if they can, and it was really weird to go from finding out your friend had passed away. Tomorrow we're burying him before sunset, and seeing him, he like it didn't look like him, right? He had been very sick over the last few months, and the hard part was there was just one other friend there. He had been around while he was sick, and he was there comforting. He had become very close to the family, and he was there comforting the mother. And we a lot of what I know about what happened, transpired in those last few months after we had last spoken was through this gentleman.
Yeah,
Um, and that's why I can't say for sure if he was schizophrenic or bipolar. I learned this through him.
but there was
Um,
something there.
yeah, and I told him about what had happened, and I said this is. I told him I go, this is terrible, but this was almost inevitable. Um, and so yeah, I miss him. I miss him, but there was also a part of me that says, he doesn't. He was feeling tortured, right? At the
Yeah,
same time,
it's when somebody passes away and it's from sickness, and it's to me that sounds like this in a roundabout way. It is attributable to sickness, and not just the medical issue, but the if there was something more at play.
Hmm.
with mental health. I mean, that it's hard to see somebody you care about suffering through illness,
Yeah.
and it's there's no good way out of it. I guess
Yeah.
knowing that somebody's not suffering anymore, it's a comforting thought, but at the same time, it doesn't replace the fact that you wish there was a magic wand that would just make it better and make them not suffer and keep them.
Yeah. Yeah, you wish you could I mean, everything hindsight's 2020, right? Like if I knew
Yeah,
he was going to die, I would have like maybe against his will shown up at his door and said, "Hey man,
look, we're
we got to get you
friends.
right. We're
Yeah,
friends, like I know we've said some like we've said some stuff to each other, but like we got to get past it."
yeah.
Um I going back to the concept that this is a celebration of those
So,
purpose, like it was really tragic end in my opinion.
yeah,
But despite all the things that that happened, my friend was a great guy, right? Like
yeah.
I loved him. He um he I'm really glad that we got a chance to do this, because thinking back to all those meals that I had with him in college, right, and even afterwards, like we had a great time with each other, right? um so I get to relive like the last 5 years or whatever it's been now, 3 years. I've been reliving that the last 6 months of his life. And this thing has given me the opportunity to relive that early times.
Remember
And
the good stuff.
yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah,
I don't know if it's comforting to think of, but I know you can look back on those fondly and those good times. I'm sure that he was able to as well. I
yeah,
mean, it.
yeah,
I don't want this to sound hollow, but those good memories you have, you know, it wasn't just one person experiencing those. It was multiple people. So those same good memories that you have that you can look back on now, he had those too. And
yeah,
I don't know if that could be comforting and all to know, but I think it's important to remember.
yeah. I think based on the fact of understanding now what he was experiencing, like maybe he was autistic, maybe he was already schizophrenic or experiencing bipolarism. I don't know what the right terms are.
Yeah,
Um, it's very comforting to know that he was able to find friends, right? Like not just one friend. He was able to find like we were a community, and he was a part of it. Um,
he,
even though like people are like, "Man, what's up with this dude?"
yeah. Well, I mean,
Yeah,
he was loved. People cared about him.
yeah. Like I'm telling you, he was ours to like he was quirky, and but he was ours,
Yeah,
right? Uh, um, you know, when we lost my nephew, man, taking it back to the hat, I if you watch people pass away enough, you'll start to get some introspection on death in
yeah.
life, right? Um, I recently watched Yellowstone. Do you watch Yellowstone?
I haven't seen it. I've heard it's great though.
It is really good. I describe it as did you ever watch Bonanza when you were a kid?
I saw episodes of Bonanza when I was a kid because that was definitely a show that my dad liked.
I think Bonanza should be must like required television, right? Because it's dated, right? Some of the themes that they say are definitely not
Yeah,
PC now, but they were shooting at like this moralism, right? That I think is worth it's worth the fare to watch.
yeah.
But anyhow, it's Yellowstone is kind of like Bonanza meets The Sopranos.
That should be the only
Uh,
way that anyone describes that or tries to sell that, because that really, what else do you need?
yeah, it's like must watch TV. But anyhow, there's a quote. There's a time. There's one. it's not a main character, so I'm not spoiling anything here. But there's a time when somebody dies, and the main character said, "That's life, right? It's part of it, right? It's part of
Yeah.
it." And so, having seen enough people that pass away that I'm close to, I've got a few takeaways, right? That I like to share with people. Like the first thing is, and by the way, I'm sorry it's taken this long to get around to this. I
Oh,
When I heard that your grandmother had passed, I my heart broke a little bit because of the stories that you had told about them in the pilot or the first episode. I know she just left us, and so I know
thank
that
you.
you're hurting. Um, and
Thank you.
I um I have learned to tell people when it's fresh. Um, you know, when we lost my nephew, I the thing that I hated the most was people telling me it's going to be okay, right?
Yeah.
Or I'm sorry, or he's in a better place, or like all the platitudes that you get.
Yeah.
And it's not people's fault. It really isn't. All they're trying to do is make you feel better, but it's an impossible task, right? They're just trying to find the best words that they can for the moment. And so, what I have learned to say, and I'll say it to you now, is Andrew, um, the fact that your grandmother passed away really sucks.
Yeah.
It really does. And I want you to know that I am saddened because you were sad, right? It doesn't try to fix it. It doesn't try to bring your grandmother back or make you. It doesn't even ask you to be okay with it. I'm acknowledging that you are in pain, and that because I care about you, that I am also in pain with you, right? And I that's one of the things that I learned. So whenever I have a friend or family that passes away, I just want to acknowledge that this sucks. It's terrible, right? This is a terrible feeling that we're all going through now, and I'm here with you. I'm standing with you in this pain, right? Um,
I really appreciate that because it is still fresh and it does still suck. It's not even quite a month yet, and I've still got her. I've still got the pamphlet from her service on my desk and a flower from there, and
mhm.
yeah,
Yeah,
still
it's
sucks.
it's a odd thing, right? When somebody dies, after you take care of the business of putting them to rest, whether that be in the form of a burial or a cremation. I don't know what your family chose. You're left, if you really think about it, you're left with their things
Yeah,
initially, right? And there's usually some sort of caretaking around that stuff, distributing like the things that you're gonna, that give to people or keep yourself, to hold on to them in some way. Um, there's their pictures, there's their memories, like the memories that you have, right? Like of the kitchen and whatnot.
yeah,
And there's and after a few years, right? Like after a few years, once the stuff is like their physical things are gone and you still have their pictures, one of the only things that's left is the grief,
yeah,
right? It's one of the ways that we hang on to them because I say this all the time. If you're one of my friends, you would have heard this already a bunch of times, but in my opinion, grief is like a chronic injury, right? It's one of those things, like if you break, like if you bust up your knee, or if you turn your ankle, or you do something that's long term that you're gonna have forever. It's like at the beginning it hurts the most,
yeah.
right? It hurts the most, and over time, it's not that the pain goes away. You just get really good at managing that pain
It
in a
maybe
way,
dulls a little bit, but it doesn't stop.
right? And every once in a while, that pain comes up to the surface and it hurts just like it did the day it happened.
Yeah,
And 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 that's okay, right? I 10 years removed from my nephew passing away, I could confidently say that I can actually talk about it now, because the 3 or 4 years immediately after, I wouldn't have been able to get a word out because it still hurt that bad.
Yeah.
But I got better at managing the pain. And I've reached a really interesting point, and I don't know if people will ever see it my way, but like when you have a kid die of cancer in your family, every time you see a St. Jude commercial, right? You see a little bald kid asking you for money to open up your heart and your wallet.
Yeah.
It reminds you, right? And it, like, initially when I would see those commercials, I used to hate it because I think, man, why do they have to remind me of
Salt in
this
the
terrible,
wound, right?
right? But now, believe it or not, when I see those little commercials, they still make me cry, right? And this goes to the idea of everything's a little, can be a little, you never know what the outcome's going to be until some time has passed, right? Your perspective of things changes. um, I see a commercial, right? I might see a toy that my nephew played with, right? I might see an episode of SpongeBob, like as I'm cruising through channels,
Yeah.
and it'll suddenly like make me like over become overwhelmed with tears. And when that happens now, I'm actually really happy, because what happens over time is and I'm sure most people that have had grief, is that you start to feel like, oh my God, I when this person first died, I never thought that I'd be able to go a day without thinking about how much I was in pain over their loss. And then it happens, right? First it's a day, then it's a week. And I started to feel guilty about not thinking about my nephew every day and not being sad about it. So now when I experience that eruption of emotion and tears, I'm happy about it because I'm able to experience that again. I'm able to be completely with him again, right? Have that pain again.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean, is that sometimes one of the only things we have left is that grief, right? And I'm not saying I like being sad. What I'm saying is, I
it's
like.
it, it's a good reminder though. The mashup Americans a few weeks ago, they made a
Mhm,
really good point. They, in some of the research they'd done in their series, and I even talked about this last night in the episode that will have come out 2 weeks before this one releases, and that's grief is an expression of love.
mhm,
We grieve people because we love those people.
yeah,
We grieve things and places and times because we love them and they matter. So I think it's in that same vein that you're talking about, that pain. It's not, the pain's not fun. It's not that you like the pain, but it's a reminder that you love that person, and you did, and you still do, and that
yeah.
that that part hasn't changed.
It hasn't. Yeah, it really hasn't. And so, um, yeah, it is it's the ultimate expression. It's one of the only things you have left, right, to experience with them. Like I feel like when I'm in that moment, like if you believe in an afterlife, for me, I feel like Josh is with me again. My nephew's name was Josh.
Yeah.
Um, like he for that moment he's with me, all over again. And so I'm not necessarily looking forward, but it's like, I got to be there again,
Yeah.
right? Got to be there again. And so again, like you said, when you get to celebrate these people, right? Tell their stories, right? Because that's the way they keep living, telling the stories, experiencing that grief. And most importantly, when somebody dies, um, allow yourself to feel it. And yeah, just
I
just experience them.
I agree with you. You have to kind of steer into it,
Yeah,
and it's not easy, but I think
yeah,
it's one of the best ways to try to not, I don't know if getting through it's the right way to phrase it, but becoming more at peace with it.
yeah. I think that like that's the turning point, right? When you can say, um, I I have this wound, right? And like, have you ever had Like you ever had a cut on your hand and it's kind of stings and like you press it so that
Yeah.
like you overwhelm it so that later it doesn't hurt as much.
Yeah. I know exactly what you mean.
That's exactly what I like to do. But
Yeah.
hey, by the way, like going off on a different tangent, and shifting here a little bit, I feel like I'm really jealous of you and a lot of the um guests so far that I've gotten to listen. I haven't gotten to listen to every guest yet, but it seems like a lot of people talk about their grandparents, right? And I'm jealous that you guys had grandparents, that you had such good experiences with, because um, my my maternal grandparents had passed away before I was born. My
Mm.
paternal grandmother, my dad's mom, she was around until I was like 18, but we were never close to her, right? And she was an amazing cook, right? I remember that. Like
Yeah.
my mom, we would go. She used to live in Koreatown, or just into Koreatown in Los Angeles, and we would go visit her a couple times a month. And my mom, like they would always take us to McDonald's or someplace to eat first, because when we would get there, they didn't want us like asking for food, right? There were six of us, right? So there were six of us, and I want to say like a good half dozen to 2 dozen of my cousins lived in the neighborhood that we would go visit. So she was always cooking. And then of course, as soon as we'd get there, we'd be like looking in the stove. Like I remember going in. She lived in this tiny apartment. I remember us like sneaking into the kitchen and like trying to peek at what she had. What she was. And then of course she'd come in and she's like, "Are you guys hungry?" And like, "Oh, we're starving, grandma," right, in Spanish. And my mom would give us this like death stare, um, because of course she was going to assume that we hadn't been fed, right? We're not. My mom was not doing a good job raising her grandchildren. Um, and my brother was like her favorite, right? So she had favorites, and my brother was one of them. And my brother went to UCLA, and he would go visit her just to eat, just to get beans, right? She made me. But going back to what I was saying is like I'm really jealous. Like we didn't have a relationship. Like I would see her once in a while. She
Yeah.
cooked. I remember her cooking really good. And then I had a great grandmother who lived to be like 115 years old.
Oh wow.
And she lived with yeah, she lived with us my entire life basically until she died. But she never cooked. We yeah. Um, so when I listen to some of your stories here, and the stories of your guests, I'm like, man, this should I think you might be able to change this to like my grandma was a great like made great food podcast, because
Maybe there should be maybe we should start mini sodes for that to hey, send in your grandmother's great recipes.
yeah. Yeah, no kidding. Like I really want like the thing that really stuck to me with your content was like the pies that you were describing about how they were thinly sliced, and I'm like, man, I like pie. I didn't know. My grandpa, even if my grandpa had lived to be old enough to meet me, I go, he definitely would have made pies, man. Like that.
What?
So
Hey, Drew, I have one last question I wanted to ask you about
sure.
Tony. And this is one I like to ask my guests: is
Hmm.
if you had a chance to have one last meal with him, what would you want that to be?
Oh, that's a hard one. Let me think about that for just a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Um, I think I would have had that naan and curry with him, because I just the picture in my mind, and I don't even know if that place is around because I think it might have burned down in this fire that they had a few years back, in that building. Like I just like the picture that I'm drawing in my mind is of a stormy Berkeley night, because it rains there a lot.
Yeah.
For With foggy windows, there used to be like little two-person tables up against the window, and I am seeing us sitting there with the bread, with the steam of the heat coming up off of it, and the smells of the different sauces, the curries, and And I'm just seeing my friend reaching in and grabbing a slight, breaking off a piece and just dipping it. And I think I can't even remember really what the curries tasted like, but I'm just like that's the picture like frozen in my mind is where I would probably go with
Yeah,
him. Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing everything today. I just appreciate the openness and the willing to share and to talk, and I appreciate it. Um, before we close out the show, though, I do want to offer any chance for you to, if there's anything that you want to promote, anything that you're working on or that's meaningful to you.
Yeah. So um I don't have any projects going myself right now in terms of like podcasting. My podcast was called the Today Well Live podcast, and it documented the journey between me and my friend Wes. We were trying to lose weight. We failed, by the way. Just a
It's okay.
um, but it was an interesting 60 episodes or more or less, and it's still available. I need to probably move it to another platform because I'm paying. I still pay for the hosting, and and it's out there. I know we joke around and say, hey, I wonder if we've blown up. Like, what if we had like a million followers and we're not even checking in? Probably not. But it was fun. It was a fun little show, and I've been thinking about some other projects. So if you get a chance to listen, that'd be great. I don't have Twitter anymore, so I can't give them a Twitter handle.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
but yeah, but my socials are all Mr. Drew Garcia. So and then I would encourage anybody listening to this, if you are interested in supporting a good cause. There is an organization called Otro Lado. They work with juveniles on the border who are at risk, and it's a very good cause. It's called Otro Lado. It's translate to the other side. So if you Google it, I'm sure you'll find it. So and it's worth your time and your money if you feel the burden of the money sitting on your wallet and you need to release it, give it to them.
Thank you so
So
much for sharing that. I'm going to make sure that we link to that in the show notes. I think it's a really important, cause, and I want to make sure we support that, of
yeah, appreciate it,
course.
brother. I feel like we're brothers now, like we're best friends forever now.
Yeah, man.
Like Thunder Buddies.
Yeah, Drew. I
um, yeah,
I
go ahead.
appreciate you coming on and talking to us.
Oh yeah, thank you, man. Thank you for the time. This has been a great honor. Um,
Awesome.
appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Okay, thank you to Drew for joining me today. I just really appreciate him coming on the show and sharing about his friend. It's never easy, really, to have these kinds of conversations, especially when things at the end weren't as positive as you would hope. Um, it's difficult, and I want to just take a moment to just acknowledge the bravery that Drew showed coming on the show, talking about his friend, being vulnerable, and I see that. I appreciate that. I hope you, as a listener, also appreciate that. I am incredibly thankful that he would take the time to talk with us and to be so open. So thank you, Drew. I also do want to call out, he did mention some organizations. I don't want to butcher this. I'm afraid I will. Otro Lado and Esperanza Immigrant Rights Project. Both of these I'm going to link in the show notes. I think this is a great way to help people in need. It's something that he's clearly passionate about, and I have nothing but respect for that. So I'll make sure to throw that in the show notes. I would encourage you, please look into these organizations, help and donate whatever way that you can. I think it's a great mission. The other thing is, I mentioned it up top, but I'll say it again. You can also subscribe to Our Last Meal wherever you're listening. And I'd also just ask to take the time to rate and review. I'd also love if you follow Our Last Meal on social media, Our Last Meal Pod, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. I'm trying to put it out there as much as I can. You can also visit ourlastmeal.com. If you are interested in being a guest on the podcast, feel free to reach out to me. You can click on the share your story button on the top of the homepage of ourlastmeal.com. You can email me at ourlastmealpod@gmail.com. You can also send me a message on, whatever social media you're comfortable with. And if you're listening on Spotify, there should be a feature that gives you a chance to provide feedback or, tell what you think of an episode. I would love to hear from you. I'd love to know what people think and, what's working, what's not working. And, if there's any kind of content you'd like for me to look into, I'd love to know that. So if you get a chance, please do that. Regardless, I hope everyone takes care, and I'll sign off the same way I always do. Take a chance, take a moment, go share a meal with someone you care about. Until next time.